Good morning and welcome into the show. It is Daniel Wortman coming to you live from the Dream Edge 8 Sports Studios. It is 8 a.m. on the East Coast. This is your 5 a.m. super early morning wake-up call, and it's 7 a.m. at U.S. Soccer House, where I'm sure the employees of Soccer House are hoping things calm down soon. I, on the other hand, hope this thing keeps raging ahead because we are still not anywhere near getting to a place where things have been cleaned up. But last night, a very big piece in this process fell, and that was Carlos Cordero offering his resignation effective immediately. And I wanted to bring on Chris Kessel, a friend of mine and friend of the show, to talk a little bit about his thoughts of what he saw over the last few days, and kind of discuss where we're at the moment, because I, Chris, am just looking at where we are, and I'm not convinced this is over.
I'm right there with you. I am absolutely right there with you.
When I look at what's happened this week, these court filings, this was a legal strategy. The board had been briefed on, progress with the court cases for a while. You and I sat in the board meeting in Nashville at the U.S. Soccer AGM, and even in the portion of the board meeting that was open to the public, which is another conversation for another day and probably warrants a policy or bylaw proposal to address, the fact that these different meetings keep happening in executive session, even at the AGMs, which is what is the point of an AGM if you can't actually go into any of the meetings. But to stay on topic here, you and I sat in the board meeting that was available to observe by any of the attendees of the AGM. And even in there, Lydia Watke, Chief Legal Officer for the Federation, was giving updates on different legal cases and different things that they were looking at. And it was apparent this was all a dog and pony show, that this kind of activity happened, ongoing and frequently, with board calls as well as board meetings that were often taking place in executive session. I find it very troubling and very difficult to believe these board members who have spoken up saying they had absolutely no idea, what was taking place from a legal tactics and legal strategy standpoint. And, wanted to kind of get your thoughts on what you observed at the board meeting at the AGM, and how that, stacks up for you in what we've seen over these last few days.
Well, let's just go ahead and say that some of the information about how they were going to proceed forward has been out in the public. There have been people talking about it and, articles written about it for months now. I mean, this isn't the first, like the legal briefs from the most recent ones aren't the first time that we've seen this. So if there's no way that you're just now hearing about it, if you're just now hearing about it, you're not following along. I mean, it's that simple. You aren't following that closely along. But that's neither here nor there, because I find it insulting that Don Garber could sit there and say this is the first he's heard of it when you represent the media. You're the partner of Sox United Marketing, who works as the media partner, the media rights partner for the U.S. women's national team. And you and your company wouldn't ask for updates and to stay abreast of exactly how a lawsuit with your partner, with the U.S. women's national team, you wouldn't want to stay totally up to date to know how that lawsuit was going when the U.S. women's national team is such a big piece of your media rights portfolio. Like, you're trying to tell me that you just said, oh, well, we'll let some third-party law firm who is known as a union-busting law firm, that lawyers study their cases and have been studying their cases for decades on how they bust unions. You're going to tell me, and you're going to expect me to believe and take it at face value, that you had no idea what was going on. I'm not. Look, I was born at night. I wasn't born last night. I mean, it's that simple.
Fair point. And to that point, Chris, the legal strategy, legal tactics, like, Meg Linehan has been on this for a while, like just digging into detail after detail after detail. This public shock display of some of the athlete council, but really especially the board members, to me is a little disingenuous. No, because we know that this has been in public record, and this leads me to my next point about this topic. As a board member, your primary fiduciary duty, like if you could look at, okay, what is the primary role and responsibility of a chief executive officer, a CFO, a COO, you could go through and you can define, what are those positions? What is that job description? If you look at what is the job description of a board member, it is simply this: to be a guardrail for an organization or a business. Your job is to provide oversight. That is the very definition of what it means to be a board member. So for you to get up knowing this stuff is already in public record, and to all of a sudden, over the last few days, there's a media hysteria that builds, public pressure, and we'll get back to that point in just a minute, because I think it's a very key point to something you and I have been talking about in terms of general reform within U.S. soccer for quite a while. But to stay on this point for a second, you are a member of the board. You have had access to this information. It is in the public domain for quite a while. To sit here and act that like you had no idea that any of this was taking place is so disingenuous. And that includes Carlos Cordero, who continues to act like he had no idea. So this is not to sit here and paint Carlos as a victim and that he's been scapegoated and he's the only one at fault here. He is just one of the members of the board. They're all at fault.
You've made the perfect point. They all should have been following along. If you didn't know, is that as bad as you knew and didn't do anything? No, but it's still bad. I didn't know. You're supposed to know. It's your job. It's your job. Like, I can't say that enough. if you sat there and you said, hey, we're going to spend $8 million on outside counsel this year. We're going to up spending as an organization, 10% this year. And it's going to all be to this law firm over this one case. $8 million. And you're not going to go, so how are we going to, what's our strategy here? And you didn't ask that? $8 million. What could we have done with $8 million? And you didn't ask.
Pay Don Garber another bonus. Oh, sorry. Was that not on your top of your list?
No, that's literally pretty far down. Probably at least number 3. But and you didn't ask, how are we going to do this? Can we actually even win? Wouldn't it just be easier to give the women $8 million to just be done with it? You didn't ask the question of how are we going to proceed? How are we going to win? What's our strategy? Your job is oversight. Your job is strategy. Your job is figuring out what the federation is going to do. Yes, Carlos Cordero is the president of U.S. Soccer. He's the president of the board. He doesn't have unilateral power to sign off and make things happen on his own. He doesn't have it. I'm sure lots and lots of your listeners are on boards of nonprofits. That's not how it works. I'm on the board of a couple nonprofits. I'm the president of 2 of them. I can't just show up and say, hey, we're doing this today. That's not, I can't do it.
When not only, yeah, to your point, and not only that, what is disturbing is this kind of, stance that's been taken where, I didn't know. I had no idea, as if that is a valid excuse. And it leads me to this, which is to me a little disturbing. You had Cindy Cohn running for vice president in this AGM just a few weeks ago against John Mata. She ran unopposed for the special term to fill Carlos's vacant seat at the previous AGM. At this AGM, leading up to the AGM, she released a statement that was, bunch of typos. There were, because of the typos, there were some things that just didn't make sense. But it certainly, was a poorly written letter that was released to the public. You can't take the time to sit there and proofread a letter. This starts to follow a pattern of what we're seeing. Then, I don't even know if you're aware of this, but I had to leave the AGM. I had actually was in the U.S. Open Cup meeting that you were in, and had to leave to go to the airport to fly to Europe to cover the Laureate Sports Awards, and I had to leave the U.S. Soccer AGM that Saturday around 3:00. And went directly to the airport. And as I am waiting for my flight, somewhere around 3:30, 3:45, no later than 4, here comes Cindy Cohn, leaving the AGM, not even sticking around to finish out the festivities of the AGM. The newly elected vice president to a full 4-year term is not even sticking around to finish out the weekend's events for the very federation that she has now been elected to serve as vice president. She's ducking out early. It's one weekend a year, this AGM, and I get it. There's other things going on in life, what have you, but I just have a hard time looking at just some of these things as a pattern to go, if you didn't know, did you really care to know? Are you really in this to know? Because, you're leaving early the AGM, you release statements that have tons of typos and never even got corrected. There was never oh, my bad. Let me fix that and resubmit. It just was left and left undone. And then, we see some of these other statements from athlete council and board members acting as though they're in shock of a legal strategy or legal tactics or wording, etc. And again, I go back to this. That is your one job, is to know and hold accountable and keep the Federation on mission. And if you were aware and didn't say anything at the time, then that's still a failure on your part as a leader, because leadership means that you have to speak up in difficult times. You know what I'm saying?
The word you're looking for here is accountability. Nobody, look, the first person, how about this? The first person to have even a small smidgen of accountability about all of this was Carlos, and he resigned. And he still wasn't fully accountable, but he resigned. And he's the president of the board. Or he was the president of the board. No, everybody else, it's when your kids are little and they do something wrong and they break something and you're not in the room and they're the only person in the room, you go in there and you go, look, who broke the lamp? Not me. That's what all this is like. Who was supposed to be oversight? Not me. It wasn't sure what. Months and months. We need to know who decided that we were going to proceed forward with this strategy, on not just this, on everything, and why. We need to know. Think about it. Months and months and months ago, the Federation hired lobbyists to lobby against the U.S. women's national team. We spent money to hire lobbyists. Who decided to do that? There's no way that Carlos Cordero made a decision on his own to hire lobbyists to lobby against the U.S. women's national team to politicians and spent money unilaterally. That's not how it works. He can't do that. The board was aware. Who said yes? Who said no? What was the discussion? It was an executive session, so we aren't, I got my air quotes up, we aren't allowed to know. We can know. You can tell us. Somebody can leak it. Something can happen. That discussion needs to be out in the open. Who did that and why? The training compensation and solidarity payments that we argued against. Who decided that was going to be the direction we were going to go? The Federation could have stood on either side of that issue. Who decided we were going to go in that direction? Who decided that? Who came down on that side of that decision? Who didn't? Why? We need to know.
I agree.
Two of the three things so far have been decided. Like, what was discussed in executive session isn't privy to an ongoing lawsuit anymore. It can be discussed. It can be released. That information can be released. We deserve to know. The people that make up the organization, the members of the organization, deserve to know which board members are representing the same interests that you have. Like, that training compensation and solidarity payment case probably is very interesting to youth clubs and adult clubs that have youth components nationally. They probably are very interested in knowing who was on their side and who wasn't. That information needs to be out there. And now we have this. Yet another thing. Giant, big picture path forward item. How are we proceeding with the largest lawsuit, going?
It is.
We don't know.
Yeah, that's the point. There's a pattern here of failing to do their job. Again, I go back to the top of the show here. Primary job responsibility is to be a guardrail for the organization. It is not a good enough excuse to say that someone else should have been managing the detail. The idea that, this had happened, if this had, what troubles me in this is that had this this public outcry and comments from certain board members had happened when details first started to roll out a couple of years ago, I would have a little bit more leniency in the way that I view those who have gone public in the last few days, because I would say, okay, look, maybe some stuff happened. They talked about the board level, and then, look, it does happen sometimes with boards. This, that you'll have one or two or three people who are more involved behind the scenes, who are trying to really run things themselves, who will kind of, get caught up in the minutia. This was Sunil Gulati is a classic example of this. He was the type of president that was very hands-on, that's well documented, that he essentially tried to run the federation by himself, and he ran the board in a way where the board was really beneath him in the way that he tried to run things, and would just bring it to the board for approval, in the same way the board might bring something to the general counsel for approval. And so if I was on that board and had talked about in a board meeting or two, like, hey, here's where I'm comfortable with, here's what I think we should do, and then I find out at the the first kind of public, necessarily so, like, this is part of the issue, like they're like, you're not going to shut us up, you're not going to shut us down, we are going to speak our minds, we are going to let the world know what's really going on. That this has been going on for a while, so to sit here and act as though you're just now finding out in the last few days is, to me, really hard to believe, that you had no idea until now. And again, to your point and to my point on this, not knowing is not good enough.
So let's take a look at this from a slightly different angle also, okay? So the strategy has been, we're going to pit the U.S. women's national team versus the U.S. men's national team. Like, that's the strategy. We're going to pit these two against each other. We're going to talk about, we have this limited pie that's, FIFA determines X amount of money and blah, blah, blah. The strategy is, we're going to pit the men versus the women. That's the way they've argued the case and everything. The strategy when solving this has been that because women and do that, then allow the conversation to be, why is the pie the size the pie is? I mean, I truly feel that.
Yeah, it's a divide and conquer strategy for sure.
Exactly, because if they would have came into the negotiations in good faith before and said, we're going to make the pie bigger and this is how we're going to do it, this lawsuit probably doesn't exist. But to keep the status quo of how media rights are done, how the teams are marketed, all of the things that would make the available pool of money larger, or potentially make it larger, like, none of that's going to be done if we keep the status quo. Excuse me. And I think that's a piece of it. And that's the kind of strategy. And, did I really believe that Carlos Cordero was actually going to detach the national teams and put those media rights up for bid without them going, to see if Soccer United Marketing offered the most money for them or a different company offered the most money? He ran on that platform. And you know where he isn't now? In charge. As we're 18 months away from, or 20, I guess about 20 some months away from the media rights coming up for bid again. I mean,
ended up buying his sales pitch. And we have seen in the last 2 years that simply was a sales pitch. It wasn't true that he was a part of the status quo. He was a part of the establishment. We saw yesterday Heather O'Reilly offer up her mea culpa that she realizes she made a mistake in going along with the Carlos Cordero train back in 2018. This is ultimately what decided the election. He won over the athlete council with this sales pitch. And when they decided to go with Carlos as a block, that gave him a firewall against Kathy Carter, and ultimately, Don Garber made the decision after a couple of rounds of voting to ditch Kathy and hitch his wagon, at least temporarily for 2 years, to Carlos. But the culture of the board here that we're talking about today, that has ultimately led to an environment in the public eye, public pressure, where Carlos Cordero resigned last night. This existed before Carlos. It existed during Carlos's reign, and it is going to continue to exist as long as those involved at the board level are still there. And some of the primary people we need to be looking at the moment are Don Garber and Sunil Gulati. So toxicity at the board level with the culture and the conduct of the board was a pre-existing culture. Carlos had been vice president for 2 years in that culture. Sunil had been at the helm since 2006. So at this point, for 12 years, going into the 2018 election, and during Sunil's reign, Carlos was on the board as an independent director. So was well versed in how things ran and what was going on and the mood in the room, etc. And so, Don Garber was also present on the board and has had a looming presence over the board for quite a while. He, after all, is the person on the board that personally benefits more than anyone else. The guy makes multi-million-dollar bonuses and salaries from Federation business and gets to sit on the board and have influence over the board, even though he can, make a show of recusing himself when you and I are sitting behind Sunil Gulati in a board meeting. The truth is that when you have a presence like that on the board, that doesn't go away. You can walk out of the room, but they still have to look at you when you come back in. And so to acknowledge and those aspects of the culture that were existing under Carlos, and to me, Carlos's biggest failure here was, when he was elected, I said at the time, I think you said at the time, and all of this.
Long story short, other board members need to resign. This is not the win. Carlos resigning is not the win. Okay? Other board members need to resign. If not knowing that this was going on, not being forthright that this was going on and you knew, whatever the case is, you should still resign. You allowed this to happen on your watch. It is as simple as that. We could have made this whole, we've been talking for 40 minutes now, and this is the main point of all this. Other board members need to resign over this. There is absolutely no way Don Garber needs to be on the board of U.S. Soccer after this.
He shouldn't have been beforehand.
Yeah, because of what you just talked about. But now, just the conflict issues and everything was one thing, and we argued that, and a bunch of people had argued that or whatever. This is a lack of institutional control, and you are a partner with the people, with the group, with the U.S. Women's National Team through the business that you run, you personally are the CEO of. You were the partner, and you had such a lack of institutional control with a partner.
Because if a president resigns, I'm not sure that they serve as past president.
Well, they weren't. He wasn't kicked off.
Well, and that's something. That's something we'll need to look into, and I'm sure we can get into today later after the show for verification.
Great fight. I'm sure you're listening.
Yeah.
Just go ahead and let us know later.
Yeah. So I'm sure we can reach out to members of the Federation and we can look through the bylaws ourselves and see what we see there. I thought, and this is what I thought I remembered about this succession plan is that in the case that a president or vice president doesn't fulfill their term, that they don't serve as a past president, that they just exit the board. So I may be off on that, and we'll need clarification. So we'll have to see. But regardless, I think Sunil Gulati and Don Garber and others, need to step down. And I think, looking at where we are, this brings me to my last point. This is something you and I have talked about on the show many times, the necessity of media scrutiny, media pressure. Now, we could get into, why this happened this week. What was so different about this week than when these comments have come out over the last few weeks? Yeah, she's president. We have all this media pressure, though. This is where I want to stay on for this last point. The necessity of media pressure. Number one, we have proof that it works. And this is something that I've been screaming for, calling for, hoping for. I know you have as well for a very long time, that we need the media to do their job and really cover the sport and really, tackle these issues and call them for what they are and increase the pressure and scrutiny on the Federation, because that is where we get accountability. There's a reason why our founders of this country made such a big deal about freedom of the press. They knew without media scrutiny, you would have tyranny, period. And so
right.
In this situation, we have seen it work. Regardless of who stoked the fire and when, and some of the curious details and circumstances surrounding why now and the process over the last few weeks since the AGM leading up to this week. Set all of that aside. Let's just look at the media scrutiny and pressure. We've seen Carlos Cordero resign due to the media pressure. Then the sponsor pressure came. Now we're looking at the rest of the board. The media pressure, the questions being asked by Grant Wall, Taylor Twellman about what did you know? When did you know it? Why did you not know it? That pressure needs to continue.
So this is only the second time that there's been media pressure ever. After the Trinidad-Tobago loss and Sunil Gulati,
effectively resigned by not running again.
Effectively resigned by not running again. This is only the second time we've had media pressure, and both Meg Linehan led the charge this time, and she's been just excellent at this coverage, and she led the charge. And I think that this is the standard that we should keep. Like, this is the kind of level of coverage that should be brought to bear on all of these decisions.
Absolutely.
I understand that all of them aren't as big and sexy as a lawsuit with the U.S. Women's National Team, but, and they aren't going to generate the public outcry. But covering these things, critically covering all of these decisions and asking these hard questions will continue to keep pressure on people and allow and remind them that they can't hide anymore. And getting a bunch of these board members on record right now, on record of when did you know, what did you know, why didn't you know, because they've already put it on record now that they didn't know. Now the question, there is no plan to create a plan. There's nothing. The board is asleep at the wheel, obviously.
Yeah,
if you take them at their word, they are asleep at the wheel. They need to resign.
I agree. I agree completely with your sentiments. The one thing that
now, obviously,
if
you take them at their word, they are asleep at the wheel. They need to resign.
I agree. I agree completely with your sentiments. The one thing that I do with every person in a job, like Cindy Cohn, as acting president. She's not president. She just serves as president until the next AGM. I Cindy Cohn. Next year doesn't mean she has to run for the position next year. She's serving as the interim. It's not a de facto that she will be the president. She's serving as the interim. It's not a de facto that she will be the president going forward beyond 2021. But regardless, she's in that role, at least on an interim basis, which, can be a little tricky in terms of I'm not fully president officially. Regardless, she's in that role, at least on an interim basis, which, can be a little tricky in terms of I'm not fully president officially, even though I'm serving in that role. What can I? This to me, where leaders have to lead, and I give her the same opportunity as Carlos. Look, I don't, even though I'm serving in that role, what can I do? What can I really push forward for? This is to me where leaders have to lead, and I give her the same opportunity as Carlos. Look, I don't necessarily agree with how Carlos got there and that he was the right candidate. Necessarily agree with how Carlos got there and that he was the right candidate for the job. I also have a hard time looking at Cindy Cohn, who had been on the board for years before becoming vice president, and coming out with her statement about how she had no idea. To me, that is inexcusable. Chris board for years before becoming vice president, and coming out with her statement about how she had no idea. To me, that is inexcusable. Chris Aarons, that's inexcusable. Don Garber, that's inexcusable. To me, it's indefensible. However, you're in this position. That's inexcusable. Don Garber, that's inexcusable. To me, it's indefensible. However, you're in this position. You can either follow suit like Carlos and say, look, I should have done more, and someone else needs to take these reins. You can either follow suit like Carlos and say, look, I should have done more, and someone else needs to take these reins. I did not do good enough. I would totally be fine with any and every board member saying that statement. And I think the media pressure needs to continue to rise on did not do good enough. I would totally be fine with any and every board member saying that statement. And I think the media pressure needs to continue to rise on those, especially Don Garber and Sunil, but others who could have done more. And so I would be completely fine with that. If you're going to say, no, I want addition, now what do? This is your time for redemption. You didn't get it right before. You messed up, plain and simple. You didn't do your job as a board member. Now you're in this position. What are you going to do? The ball is in your court. to use that expression. Where is the public plan and the vision? Now, I'm not expecting her to roll that out today, less than 24 hours after Carlos's resignation. But the point is, over the next few weeks and months, if you're not going to resign, then show us what you plan to do. Show us how you plan to lead. Show us how what you're going to do is any different than what was being done before. And
the best thing that she can do is to start to change the culture of hiding everything.
Right.
Be forthright. Put it out in the open. Instead of taking everything to executive session, leave some of it in the public record. Err on the side of transparency. Unless it absolutely has to be an executive session, leave it out for the public to know. Err on the side of transparency.
I agree. Transparency, a vision, communication, like all of these things are the areas where we need to see from her if she's going to stay in this position. She's been thrust into it, and I'm going to, and that to me those are some clear things to look for. More transparency from the board. More communication to the public, changing the culture of the board and the way it's run, and a vision and plan going forward. Carlos never gave one. He would always revert back to, well, I've got a 5-year, business strategy, business plan. That's not what we're talking about. Where does the federation go? If we're going to become, like I've said before, I'm not a big fan of the mission statement of the federation to make soccer the preeminent sport in America. I don't think that goes far enough. But if that is your mission, right? That's what's written. If that is your mission, okay, how do you get there at least? How do you get soccer to the preeminent sport in America? And if your vision is not written with that end in mind, then you didn't do it. You didn't do your mission, because that is the mission that's laid out. So a plan should be leading us step by step to that end, to make soccer the preeminent sport in America. And until we get there, then all we have to do is to look at where we are and realize that we're still spinning our wheels. And that's why I think the media pressure here, back to this last point, is so crucial. Taylor Twellman, Grant Wall, Meg Linehan, others, you, myself, we have to continue this media scrutiny and media pressure. And I want to make
Tim McCauley has been awesome also.
Yes.
I
want to...
I want to say, and there aren't big pieces of news to cover, or there are, but they're just not being covered because of fear of ruining the game. Okay, what we see now is when you cover these big storylines, people really, really care, and when you put it out there, it allows the people who really care to really get fired up. Cover these stories. Cover them. Trust that the people love the game, because we do. At the end of the day, I'm a fan of soccer. I love soccer. I love playing. I love coaching. I love watching it. I'm passionate about the game. You are too. Neither one of us are getting paid to do any of the stuff that we do around the game. There are millions of people who want to be, when they talk about soccer culture in Europe and how passionate people are, it's because they're invested in it at every level. People in the United States want to be invested in the game at every level. They want to be passionate. When you cover the game the way that you've been covering the game lately, soccer media, when you cover every aspect of it, from why isn't the NWSL schedule out yet, to they knew about this and they weren't talking about it at the board level, or this case is ridiculous and how they're attacking the women's national team is crazy. But when you cover all forward, grow, to use the U.S. soccer term, grow the game in the United States.
We've had too much entertainment tonight from soccer media and not enough, headline news and investigative reporting for sure. And we're seeing the effects of that this week. That the more light gets shed Carlos need to continue. More resignations should follow. If Cindy chooses not to resign, then she needs to lead and
to
show that
front and lead.
Get out front and lead and show that she can lead, and do it effectively. And
Yep.
my point to all of this is not personal for me. This is not like Carlos is an evil guy to go. This is not Cindy is a bad person. Whatever she needs. This is a situation where these board members are in positions. I am looking at what they're doing, judging by their actions, judging by their job descriptions. Did you get the job done or not? It's not personal. It is an evaluation of the job performance, and so for me, to me, the media pressure is key and critical in that happening. As we go forward. So.
Something that you like, what you're touching on here, this road to redemption. Media pressure also does another thing. Okay, one other thing. We've talked about it for years. This culture of fear that previously existed. You should be more scared of the media now than anybody on the board or any person, and the pushback that you'll receive. Because that used to be what people were scared of. Now, you can be tagged. You can have your career ruined because this is who you are. This will be when they Google you, it will be because you were on the board of U.S. Soccer when they decided to argue that women were inferior to men. I mean, that's literally, you're on the board while that happened. Which are you more scared of? Are you going to come out and say, hey, just like you said, and fix all this and admit that you weren't doing your job and, dedicate your career going forward to fixing that? Or are you still going to be scared of what made you scared to speak up before and what made you scared to not try to change things before? Which one are you more scared of?
Right.
I mean, if the fear of culture is that deep and it's that ingrained and you're that worried about a little bit.
When you look at our country, and for people to wrap your heads around why you and I and others are continuing to look at this and build pressure upon the board for resignations and others to be accountable. If you look at the country of the United States, we don't just elect a president every 4 years of the country. With the president comes in a staff, and they'll have a chief of staff, and then they'll have appointees throughout the government. They'll even bring in their own vice president. But it's a whole new. I'm going to use the word regime, even though that's not necessarily a democratic word here. But you get the picture here that you of people, and that. Regardless of whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, in favor, not in favor of, Trump, Obama, Bush, Clinton, doesn't matter. Anytime they come in, they bring their own people, and that changes the culture of the White House. It changes the culture of the government, at least for the time that they're in charge, until a new president is elected and they bring in their staff. To think, and I'm making this point for a reason, to think that one person by themselves is responsible for the culture of the board, and somebody that was very dictatorial in his attempt to lead. And so it's not as if you're removing this big personality and no one was able to do anything. No one was able to breathe as Carlos was president. I don't think he led well. And that's well documented. But I don't think that removing him is going to fix everything or clean up everything or is the solution here in and of itself. It's the first step. but more changes need to come. Just like when we change out a president of this country, other board members need to rotate out as well in order for all of us to see that real change is actually on the way. And I think that the board members that remain need to take a serious look in the mirror and decide, I didn't do good enough and someone else needs to take this spot. Or if they decide, I'm not going to give this up, I'm going to fight on, then you need to start to show and prove that you're worthy of reconsideration from resignation, in my view, because right now this one move is not enough, and we need more in order to have sustained change and culture within the board. We saw at the AGM, the membership are not happy with where the board is and the direction of the board, and just swapping out a figurehead at this point is not enough. We have to see action to on here in what is essentially the first hour of today's show, and providing your thoughts and insights, and keep up the great work.
All right, thanks. Well, we'll talk to you later.
Thank you. That is Chris Kessel, at the Chris Kessel on Twitter. He's very involved in the state of West Virginia and a big advocate for U.S. soccer reform, and we need more like him. You can see that when people are passionate and able to really dig in to issues and help raise alarm, we can actually see change happen. And Chris and I have been talking about this for years. It is nice to see some positive momentum here in movement, but it's not over. We're just getting started. And speaking of just getting started, if you haven't gotten started, you need to get started by going to ductigbrand.com today, duktgbrand.com. Get started by placing an order for your next journal. There's never a better time than right now, where so many clubs are in hiatus, to restock on resources. And when you do, get use promo code DW Show to get 10% off of your order, and get those notebooks in and get prepped for the next part of your season, when everything gets to come back after the coronavirus pause and outbreak that so many clubs and state associations are under for the next few weeks. So now's as good a time as ever to do that. So take advantage of it today at ductigbrand.com. We'll be right back with Kartik right after this. Welcome back into the show. Thanks for tuning in today. A lot happening in the world of American soccer over the last few days, and wanted to have on a friend of the show and a friend of mine, and welcome back to the show, Kartik Krishner. Kartik, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Daniel. It's a really weird time when we talk about coronavirus, the last 72 hours, and then U.S. soccer. I mean, almost concurrently, these two huge stories in the world, and in the world of soccer, coronavirus having such an impact on the world of soccer also taking place. And it's I would say one of the most surreal 72 hours.
A few days. You and I both from hurricane country. We know full well the effects of these severe storms, and we have seen a press media storm swirling through U.S. Soccer HQ and at the board level. And last night we saw the first kind of domino to fall after the public pressure from sponsors over the revelations of these just disgusting and despicable comments in the U.S. Women's National Team case filed by the U.S. Soccer Federation. And the first victim in this whole scenario was Carlos Cordero himself, the president of U.S. Soccer No More, offering his resignation effective immediately. What were your thoughts when that news came over the wire?
Yeah, so it came over last night, and it came over at a strange time because we had just been dealing with learning that Mikel Arteta, Arsenal's manager, former great Everton and Arsenal player, had tested positive for coronavirus. Then an hour later, we learned about Pablo Dybala, one of the really great attacking players in world football right now, testing positive. And then this Cordero news kind of just got sandwiched between then Callum Hudson-Odoi, obviously the promising England and Chelsea winger, testing positive for coronavirus. So it was like, I wasn't expecting it. I was focused on which player was going to. Cordero had been cut loose from his board by the time that game took place last night, or 2 nights ago. That match was Wednesday night, yeah. So 2 days ago, there was this situation where you could see already the moving parts. There had been so much criticism of U.S. soccer since we got our first peek at the legal briefs earlier in the week. The thing, though, that I find most interesting is I think the haste and speed this took place at, and there's a lot of people now closing ranks saying sponsorship pressure. This is how it worked. I think there also was an element of people on the board and people who've been involved in the sport longer than Carlos Cordero, and people who've been involved in U.S. soccer longer than Carlos Cordero, maybe wanting to pass the buck and maybe wanting to pin this on him for various reasons, not only to protect their own interests and culpability in this, but also, quite frankly, because I think we're now over 2 years into Cordero's regime, Daniel, and I have to say, while I have not been a fan of his, I do not necessarily have the animus for him that I do for some of the other people that have been around the U.S. soccer, because I think genuinely he needed to have the opportunity to clear the deck and then maybe build his own philosophy around how he wanted the organization to look. He never quite got that opportunity, and we might get into more of why. And so I'm not sure really him leaving.
Yesterday, athlete council members with mea culpa saying, I got fooled in this and made mistakes. I mean, part of me is like, well, what did you think was going to happen? I mean, the guy had been an insider for over a decade and had served as vice president. Now he's taking over as president and he's going to be an outsider. Looking at the situation, the environment, the culture, this was not a culture created by Carlos. The issue for Carlos is that he said a bunch of things, running for president, didn't follow through with them as president in order to clean up things to a level where the Federation was going in the right direction. Instead, it was continuing to get worse. That is ultimately what was his downfall. Not that he necessarily created it, he just never cleaned up the mess. And the mess, it has to be said, the mess was created, the culture was created with Sunil Gulati and Don Garber, who are both still in the board meetings. Sunil as past president and Don Garber as a board member, who, by the way, makes millions of dollars off of his contract with U.S. Soccer each and every year. So you want to know where the culture is shaped, where the environment has been shaped, what has been going on for so long? It starts with those two. And Cindy Cohn, who has been in a president's role, she has an opportunity for redemption to say, I am not Carlos and I am not Sunil, and I'm going to clean this up. And if she follows through with that and she starts to actually clean up some of these issues issues and really pushes forward on proactive reforms that start to heal the soccer problems in this country, then kudos to her. And you know what? We'll be fine, and we will support her completely. But until we see those actions, we have to be skeptical of everyone on that board, especially Sunil and Don, who have created this culture. But the truth is that Carlos, in this situation, in my opinion, looking at everything that came out last night, is being set up as the scapegoat, so that others can all just, it's like a Julius Caesar moment in Rome, and we're just going to throw all of our daggers at him. Don't anybody look at us. We had no idea this was going on for months. Wink, wink, nod, nod. We had no idea, being on the board for years, that this was going on. Don't look at us. And if you didn't know, for me, that is an admission of guilt in and of itself, because your job as a member of the board of directors is to serve as a guardrail for that organization. And when you're on that board and you don't know this is not like let's decide, if we're disgusted with the comments and these tactics, where were you? Where were you in all of this time in terms of doing your fiduciary duties? You're culpable. There, on some level, it's not just Carlos. The whole board has this job, not just the president. And so can Cindy, right the ship? Can she turn things around? Can she start to work on enacting, reforms and cleaning up the culture and minimizing the negative influences and effects of Don Garber and Sunil Gulati on that board? She has every opportunity to do so, because she is now the interim president. But she, along with everyone else on that board, have some shared level of responsibility with Carlos for what has taken place so far. When you see this, how do you read the board and their culpability and their responsibility to step up and share some of the blame, if not as much blame as Carlos?
Oh, I think they have as much blame as he does. Now, he's the face. He's very much the figurehead at the top of U.S. soccer. He's the public face. But I think a lot of these things have gone on with the board's consent. The one thing, we said that he hasn't done a whole lot and he hasn't changed a whole lot. One thing that Cordero has changed, at least internally from my understanding, is one of the criticisms of Sunil Gulati was that he would pick up the phone in the morning, he'd call Don Garber, they'd hatch, whatever they were doing, they'd maybe let Dan Flynn in on it, and then that would be comments about them when he was running for president. And the TV deal involving U.S. soccer and Soccer United Marketing and Major League Soccer, it's still the same deal that had been negotiated by Sunil Gulati and had been papered over weeks before Sunil Gulati handed the presidency over to Carlos Cordero, so he didn't leave it in Cordero's hands in case Cordero wasn't on board with it. So the reality is Cordero has never had an actual opportunity to deal with this Soccer United marketing issue. I had a sense that maybe I was getting a sense recently, and by recently I mean in the last couple of months, that there might be a move from Cordero and his allies to split the deal in 2022. To split, say, okay, Soccer United Marketing can represent us. They can They can be the marketing agency. They can be the media partner. However, they need to split the contract. So they will negotiate a separate deal for the U.S. men and women than they do for Major League Soccer. I don't particularly like some being involved as the marketing agency or the media agency for U.S. soccer at all, but I certainly would take them in that circumstance better than bundling with MLS.
For sure.
MLS, is where a lot of the conflicts come in. So I was beginning to get a sense that Cordero might say to Garber, hey, okay, we're going to keep you guys on board. We're going to keep this little incestuous thing going, but we need to split the deal so that it looks a little better. So now was an owner of that league, but there were a number of NWSL clubs, as you know, that are not owned by MLS owners or USL owners. And it was those owners who pushed the league to go and make an independent deal with another media agency, Octagon, instead of going with Soccer United Marketing. And lo and behold, Octagon has gotten NWSL on CBS. Their NWSL championship game will be over the air this year on CBS. I'm not even sure if MLS Cup is over the air. Some years it is, I guess. Some years it isn't. But the NWSL final will actually be over the air this year on CBS, and they're going to have a couple other games on network television. So that's a great deal for the league. I'm thankful that deal just got done this week. I'm thankful that deal got done, Daniel, because I'm thinking if this is what we suspect it might be, which is Sunil Gulati and Don Garber reconsolidating some degree of control over the direction of U.S. soccer, I think what would have happened is NWSL would have been thrown back into some clutches, and you might have seen some more, maybe an extension of the NWSL relationship with U.S. soccer. Although I think that is still tied to the next collective bargaining agreement, which it's going to be difficult to do now after all of this stuff is out there. You can say, well, maybe now that Cindy Cohn is the president, the interim president, the acting president, that there will be a come to Jesus moment, and the women's national team players and the critics of U.S. soccer on this particular lawsuit are going to they're going to meet somewhere in the middle and do a deal. But the thing is, I think they've all been humiliated in the process of what's happened, what came out earlier in the week, but still had some feeling of reverence and deference to U.S. soccer for everything they've done previously for women's soccer. There are others who are much more militant, who I do not think are going to accept anything that doesn't. They're not going to meet U.S. soccer halfway. So is what I'm trying to say. So even though there's a very, very kind of unified unit look at the U.S. women's national team, I think there are some of our players that are more militant than others. And Daniel, I will say, during the course of this process, you went from having and I don't want to get too deep into which players are in which camp, but I will say Becky Sauerbrunn was in the kind of more moderate camp, right? And Carly Lloyd was kind of in the more militant camp, if you will. I think there are more players, and I would say it was kind of split when this whole thing started. It was kind of split when Cordero got elected, and the Athletes Council went with Cordero, right? And you had, at the time, Heather O'Reilly, who was an active women's player on that Athletes Council, and Angela Hucles and some other former women's players that were on there. I would say now there are more people in that more militant camp. Not the whole team. Like I said, there's splits. But I think they're more in that more militant camp. I don't think Cindy Cohn becoming the president or the acting president necessarily is going to dial that back. So, I think there's more choppy waters ahead on all this stuff.
People knew about it. I didn't even know about it until yesterday, and when I got word that this had taken place. So there's some very suspicious timing looking at this AGM and Alec Papadakis serving on the board through the AGM, and then right after that is taken out of his board seat and replaced by Stephen Malik, and now Cindy Cohn just a few weeks later is now been promoted to interim president with Carlos Cordero stepping down, and it kind of goes back to this scapegoat scenario where it looks like this whole move on Carlos might have been orchestrated. The media pressure and the media buildup, even the article from Grant Wall, there's been some accusations that he may have been tipped off, that the board was looking to get Carlos to resign, to get out of the way, and that's why he ended up writing the article in the first place, because he knew that there was a move afoot. What are your thoughts on all this? Because this is a little bit concerning. The more we learn about some of this process going on with the AGM into the board seat change, that new board member being the employer of Cindy Cohn, the now interim president, and now seeing Carlos resign last night.
too much influence, being on the pro council and being on the board of governors, being also, quite honestly, kind of a difficult person in his boardroom machinations. I mean, but he's a very, very tough, kind of well-versed real estate patent type attorney, Alec Papadakis, and obviously he's the owner of USL, which is how he's in all of this. But that there had always been some concerns from Don Garber from MLS about Papadakis being on the board. Malik has made an alliance as of 2017, and we've heard Rocco Camiso speak a lot about this. Malik had evidently made an alliance with U.S. Soccer and with MLS. Now, he's not getting an MLS expansion franchise. Now, I thought that was part of the premise, right? That he would bring an MLS team to the Raleigh-Durham area. He does have an NWSL team, though. It's the champions, right? The team that's been so dominant in women's soccer over the course of the last 4 years, and maybe the best women's club soccer team in the world, up there with Olympique Lyonnais and Chelsea, Manchester City, a couple of the other really good ones. But I think this is very suspicious, especially now that we know allegations that he was in their camp, and that also probably was supporting Kathy Carter for president last time. And I don't want to, tonight's not the night, today's not the day to get into it, Daniel, but maybe next time, as the dust settles from what happened last night and what's happened the last week, we could get back into the whole Carter versus Cordero aspect of the race from 2 years ago and realize that maybe some of the people who were initially with Kathy Carter were never really on board with Cordero. And they had been scheming against him the whole time. So I suspect Malik may be in that camp. And if he was, and there's some connection here, then I think we all have more questions to ask about this. Again, I'm not making excuses for Cordero. I think he did a lousy job. I think he didn't live up to the potential he had in this office. He did not keep the promises he had made during the campaign to get elected. However, there is, to me, no doubt whatsoever that most of these problems, most of the things that are being pinned on him, most of the things that the public now blames Carlos Cordero for are not, in fact, his fault, but are the fault of others. And of others that may, and again, I stress may, and I know you're stressing may also, Daniel, may be benefiting from what happened last night when he stepped aside.
Well, I mean, it is, if you wanted to be a conspiracy theorist and walk this thing back to 2018, and you knew that at the time Don was backing Kathy, and going to be Don's first choice, but he was going to go there before he went anywhere else. And ultimately, Don saw after a couple of rounds, it's not going to happen. And he told Kathy, and I had people witness this. He told Kathy, sorry, I'm pulling my support. I'm going with Carlos. Carlos gets over the finish line, was never Don's first choice. And you look at how things have played out since, and some of this, Carlos, didn't necessarily make the mess, but he, as I said earlier, he didn't clean up the mess either. And for that, the pressure got to a point to where, he felt like he needed to resign and he needed to get out of the way. But then you look at, from a conspiracy standpoint, you start looking at like connecting these dots. Well, if Don was not a fan of Carlos, if rumors that I heard at the AGM, I don't know if you've heard all these rumors, but about Soccer United marketing and the possible rebidding or going somewhere else in 2022, we're swirling around. And
as I said earlier, Daniel, at the very least, I was pretty convinced Carlos was going to say, okay, Don, maybe we'll keep some, but we're splitting it from the MLS contract. And don't get me wrong, I don't like some representing U.S. Soccer, but I think most of the damage is done by the bundle. So I think at the very least, Carlos was going to try and break that bundle, which is a direct threat to Garber's livelihood, right?
Right. And Garber was not that end. And the situation needs more light shed on it. And I think Cindy herself needs to answer, at the very least, for what did she know and when did she know it when it comes to the legal briefs. As vice president and being on that board for years, to say that you just figured this thing out or found out a few days ago and somehow that means you're blameless that's not good enough for me. And that's not personal. It's just a fact. I mean, you have a job to do and it hasn't been done. And now we're hearing and seeing some of these other really, conspicuous things going on, and it makes you even more concerned about what's really going on here. Like I said before, I hope that she has all the best intentions and she's going to clean things up, and that includes and Sunil as the two chief issues she's got to deal with. But there's some curious moves going on that need to be followed, and I think there needs to be more pressure and intense scrutiny on all of the board members as to what did they know, when did they know it, and why have they not offered resignations for not doing their job to ensure that the Federation was operating in a better manner. As we kind of
competitive games, I think very many competitive games in Europe for the next 60 days, and this is the heart of the European football season. This is when people domestically tend to not pay attention to Major League Soccer, U.S. Soccer, or USL, and they re-engage during the summer because they're watching the Premier League or Bundesliga or Serie A, La Liga. They're not going to be doing that in the next few weeks. So this now becomes a pressure cooker for U.S. Soccer, and there will be cosmetic efforts, I think, in the governance to prop up this change and basically pin everything on Cordero and say we've now moved on. There's no, and I noticed that Taylor Twellman last night was beating the drum of there need to be more changes. This is just the beginning, but he seems to be almost alone among media members saying that. Well, I think Hercules Gomez was also saying it, but there's also this divide between people who are on ESPN who are very aggressive, like Twellman and Gomez, Seb Salazar, and then there's a cadre of other media members who now will probably close ranks. Let's be honest. So my concern is they all close ranks at this point. I think you said you asked the question earlier: would Cindy Cohen be more favorable to Sunil and Don than Cordero was? I think that's probably obviously a yes. Unfortunately, now I hope I'm proven wrong with that, but I certainly know that there was a lot of tension between Cordero and Galati. He has the ability to rearrange the chess pieces. We know this about Garber and about MLS and Soccer United marketing. So I think the most important piece they needed to remove was Cordero. Now the question is, do they have someone is Cindy Cohen their person, or are they going to need to put someone after her tenure as acting president is up? Put someone else in there that they can control and that they can make sure that deal in 2022 is the deal they want done, the bundle deal that they want to protect. I think a lot of it comes back to that. And Cordero wasn't going to blow it up the way Eric Ronaldo was going to blow it up, or Kyle Martino had promised to blow it up, or a number of other candidates, Steve Gans also. But he certainly wasn't going. It appeared, and I think you agree with this, Daniel. It appeared at the last few months he was not going to just rubber stamp another deal like the one that Sunil had gotten U.S. Soccer into. So if you're thinking about it from that perspective, and you're Don Garber, yeah, you see that there's a clumsy PR move by U.S. Soccer, you're going to pounce. The fact that Major League Soccer put out a statement on this shocked me at first. And then I thought about it and I was like, oh, well, yeah, this must be Garber trying to play against Cordero, because he would have gotten to hire the next set of important staff people with Jay Berhalter and Dan Flynn leaving the organization. So they also have denied Cordero the ability to do that. And maybe now they control the staff hiring process. Maybe that's something we look for in the next 30 days or so. And the next time I join you, Daniel, we'll be talking about that. Well, they were able to elbow out Cordero in time to where they could control that process.
I don't know, but the more I look at this whole situation, I'm glad Cordero resigned because we were not going in the right direction. I mean, nothing personal against the guy. He wasn't getting it cleaned up, and he wasn't getting it fixed. He wasn't leading well enough. At the same time, as I said before, it did not begin with him. It will not end with him. And we should continue to place the same level of intense scrutiny and pressure on the remaining board members, because as I look at this board, they are all culpable, and we're not cleaning this thing up by keeping the same people in charge. And, that might mean that Cindy Cohn and some others are collateral damage. Maybe they intend to do the right thing. Maybe they mean well. If not, resign, should be forced out. Don Garber and Sunil Gulati, chief among them. But looking at where we are, it's curious the moves that have taken place over the last few weeks to get us here, and that is something that I think we've got to keep a really, really close eye on going forward. So, Kartik, thanks for joining the show as always. We always appreciate your time. We will definitely have you back on again soon. I have a feeling with nothing going on the field over the next few weeks, we're going to have a lot more time to get into some of these governance issues, and I suspect we'll have some more details to come to get into very, very soon. So thanks for joining the show as always, and we really appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you as always, Daniel. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. That is Kartik Krishner, and look, it's a strange world we're living in here in the real world and in the soccer world, and we've got to keep our eyes on what's going on. There are some very curious things going on, and only time will tell how these things shape up and how they fall out. But we've got to keep our eyes and our focus and our pressure to get this fixed once and for all. We'll be right back after this.
You could know that you made a difference. You could know that you had truly impacted the life of a family, of a community, of a region. There was either clean water or there wasn't. We believe in a world where every single person has clean and safe water to drink, and we will continue fighting until that happens.
Welcome back into the show. It has been a whirlwind last few days. In the last couple of days, we've had special editions of the show where we've gone extended time, 2 hours, both days, yesterday and today. But just felt like there was just so much to cover and not enough time to get it in an hour. And big thank you yesterday to Sky Eddie Bruce, as well as Anthony DeChico, and today with Chris Kessel and Kartik Krishner, going into where we are and what's going on. And yesterday I wrote something, and I want to kind of read this statement and close the show with some final thoughts on where we are with all of our national team players instead of the adversarial one we see on full display. Other candidates like Hope Solo warned of the divisive nature and culture permeating the upper leadership levels of the Federation also. It's sad that this country went the other way. I have said it many times, but U.S. soccer serves the few at the expense of everyone else. This worldview has reared its ugly head in countless ways, including this most recent revelation of the disturbing and deplorable comments and legal tactics surrounding the U.S. women's national team case. The majority of those who were involved with the Federation Board and Athlete Council chose status quo. They went with Carlos Cordero. This decision may have benefited them personally, but it has led to more lawsuits, including more than $9 million in legal fees in 2019 alone. It has not led us to a more perfect union or any closer to becoming the preeminent sport in America. Enough is enough. The past is the past. We can't change it, but those in positions of influence and power have the opportunity to change the present and thus the future. Carlos Cordero should resign, and in fact, we now know he has resigned, and or be removed from the board immediately. We know that now he's resigned. This statement was released prior to Cordero's resignation. As I look at where we are in the state of the Federation and the things that are going on at this present moment, I am more convinced than ever that Carlos Cordero's resignation was justified, but it should not be the last resignation. This culture, this toxic culture, has been in existence for a very long time. And when we look at things that have been taking place, like this case, these details and things surrounding this case have been in the public eye for a while. We've talked about it on today's show. Members of the board were well aware of tactics and other things, questions that had been going on. It had been covered before. I am glad that the media scrutiny and pressure increased to such a level this week that Cordero finally decided enough was enough and others began to speak up and speak out. I am glad for that. But it shouldn't stop there. And Caitlin Murray, in her piece that she's picking up a little bit further down, now the VP candidate that sources say Cordero favored, Cindy Parlow-Cone, has abruptly been thrown into the president role. Parlow-Cone, a former U.S. women's national team midfielder, spoke out publicly against U.S. soccer's sexist legal strategy hours before Cordero resigned, calling it troubling. Now she'll be at the helm until February 2021, when someone else can be elected to take over Cordero's term, and she'll serve as U.S. soccer's first female president. There's not a question of Parlow-Cone's capabilities, but of how much she'll embrace the job at a time when the Federation lacks direction and leadership. The presidential position is unpaid, but heavily involved. Another sign that U.S. soccer has failed to evolve past its quaint beginnings, and the volunteer VP role she signed up for was very much part-time. What U.S. soccer needs is a much larger overhaul. Heather O'Reilly, who was on the Athlete Council that voted for Cordero, said U.S. soccer should go through a, quote, lengthy process of reorganization. She's right, but the Federation has resisted it for this long. Why should anything change now? Maybe, just maybe, the situation is dire enough that now is the time for true reform and a shift in culture. After all, it's hard to imagine it can get any worse. I would like to thank Caitlin for her post and her article there, and I agree completely with her sentiments. And we will get into more of that next on what remains at U.S. Soccer House, and especially at the board level. Thanks for watching the show. Thanks to Chris and Kartik for joining the show. As always, you can watch on BegaTV.com, and you can also watch on DanielWorkman.com, Facebook.com/WRKMN, on Twitter. Catch me on Instagram or Twitter at Daniel Workman as well. Thanks for watching. We'll see everyone again next week.